Good morning, I hope. First of all, let's go into the chat and tell me whether I have managed to get audio working this morning and launch on time. Are we getting audio? Is my microphone working? Let's get some feedback. Can you hear me? Have I screwed up again? I mean, it's highly possible. Good. We've got audio. Okay. That's a terrible start, isn't it? Incredibly unprofessional, using you guys as my sound team. Good morning. Welcome to Graham Hughes's Morning Brew. Some of you will have noticed that Graham Hughes is actually in the chat. I'm just going to take my headphones out because I'm getting an awful lot of feedback from my own voice, which is not pleasant to hear. Graham is in the chat monitoring me from afar. He's on strike today. He's complaining about his working conditions, having to make 3 or 4 videos every day and, talk to the general public about political issues and the fact that he travelled the entire world, every single country in the world, without using an aeroplane. I don't know if anybody knew this. This is information that I'm sure is quite new to you. But Graham's in the chat monitoring me. He's doing a 360-degree review, I think, of my performance. And so far, it's going well. He sent me a message this morning saying that it was perfectly possible that I would get a 1,500% decrease in my salary. I don't know if anyone saw Donald Trump last night, but he made a speech saying that he was going to cut the price of drugs by 1,000% and 6,000%. Which means the drug companies would be paying people to use their drugs, which is a unique business model that I think may work for the NHS. Although I do have some ideas on the NHS. The doctor's strike starts tomorrow. It's a 5-day strike, and the lovely Wes Streeting is doing his best to make that worse, I think, at the moment. But obviously it's something that's quite close to my heart at the moment. I just want to call out the people in the chat. Thank you very much for being here, guys. I feel the love and support from all of you to help me to cover for the amazing Graham Hughes. The more I do this, the more I realise the amount of work that he puts in to this stream every day. There's a huge amount of research that needs to be done to make sure that you're at least slightly informed about the subject that you're talking about. And you guys are there to fact check me in particular. And I think probably particularly today, because although the NHS is close to my heart, obviously, there are some problems with the NHS, and the strike that's happening tomorrow, well, still at this stage is happening tomorrow, for the next 5 days is probably testament to some of the fundamental problems in the NHS. So we're going to have a look at that. I've got an idea about how we might, or the government might throw out a policy that could change things around a little bit. But also just look into the general problem of the business structure of the NHS, which I think is the bit that's really broken. Just want to call out some of you that are in the chat before we get going. Joanna Hammond, hi. Scott, thank you for welcoming everybody today. Saz, Graham Hughes Travels, no idea who that is. Some sort of troll, I imagine. Don't know how I managed to get past the censors for this channel, but hello, Graham Hughes Travels, whoever you are. Audrey White, I'm sorry to hear your news from the weekend, Audrey, and that must be a pretty awful time for you, and I hope all of you are there to help your mother through the process, and I hope there's somebody there to help you. Obviously there's a lot of people in the chat wishing you well. Hi to Sarah, hi to Alistair, Chris C, Trip, Vendetta, Mike Higgins, and all of you. Thank you for joining us. I want to know who Brighton and Hove actually is. I've not seen you in the chat very often before, and it's nice to have somebody local. So you've just said that a 6,000% price cut seems consistent with a business plan that would bankrupt a casino. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think Trump's plans are particularly good when he comes to numbers, in particular. Welcome, Gallifrey and Wren, and Dizzy Dizzle. Nice to see you all. If I just keep reading out the chat, that'll take up the hour, won't it? Hey, look, the first super chat there, Overwrite, 79p. Thank you very much for that. That's a very welcome contribution to the drugs bill, I'm sure. But no, thank you for that. And if you can do some super chats, it does help. If you want to talk in the chat, then you need to subscribe to the channel. And obviously, I think you have to subscribe to the channel as well to do a super chat. So 2 sets of button presses. Okay, let's look at the doctor strike tomorrow. What's it all about? There was a doctor strike last year under the Tory government. There was the Wes Streeting came in and supposedly gave a 5.4% pay rise, I think. And that seemed to assuage the BMA and the junior doctors. There's a number of things that come up. I'm going to go off on a few tangents here, but the fact that we call them junior doctors, I think, is a bit of a difficult nomenclature. A junior doctor can be somebody that is completely qualified as a doctor, but still operating in training for up to 8 to 10 years. Most of the doctors that you see in a hospital are probably junior doctors. If they're a registrar, if they're the doctor that you see for your tests or diagnosis, more than likely they're going to be a junior doctor. But I think the name is a little difficult. I'm going to interrupt myself because Alistair Kerr has just donated 5 political memberships, political social memberships. Thank you very much for that gift. So we've got Howard Kendrick, FD Griffin, Flint Reed, SpongeBob Death Star, and R Dub, who are all now members of the channel, which means that you're perfectly capable, having saved all that money, of giving us a super chat. That would be lovely. But Alistair, thank you very much for the memberships. That's very much appreciated. I hope everybody gets some value out of that. So yeah, Chris C, you make a good point. They're trying to change the name to resident doctors, which I think is a much better name. There's almost a military structure to the NHS. It's something that struck me very recently in that all the surgeons that I deal with are called Mr. something, and all the oncologists that I deal with are called Dr. something. And I don't know whether that's the surgeons putting themselves up above the doctors. I imagine it is, knowing surgeons. Sarah Davis gave us a super chat earlier. I'm sorry about that. Unlike Graham, I'm incapable of spotting these coming in. Sarah Davis, £2 super chat. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. That's much appreciated. And Sarah says, Mike, you're doing a great job, which is praise indeed. Thank you. So yeah, doctors, the resident doctors, junior doctors are going on strike again. They had a poll within the BMA, the trade union, which has given them a mandate. I think a 96%, 98% of doctors, of resident doctors, have voted to have strike action up until January 2026. So we can expect more strikes over the winter if this isn't resolved during this current strike. So just a few facts. There's something in the region of 75 to 80,000 junior doctors working in the NHS. That's a huge number once you start to think about the number of people involved. And that's around 78,000 doctors that are going on strike as of tomorrow morning for 5 days. That leaves the consultants, the doctors above them, and there's around 50,000 of those working for the NHS, 50 to 53,000. Alistair, thank you very much for the £2 super chat. Keep up with the great job, Mike, says Alistair. I think Graham, this is probably why Graham keeps appearing in the chat. He's slightly worried now that I may be here to coming over here, taking his job. I'm sure he wouldn't mind for a while, actually, particularly as the super chats all head his way. So who's the mug? But thank you, Alistair. That's much appreciated. Plus the memberships, very generous of you. So Yuri, I'm just going to be reading out super chats now. This is great. Yuri Ninfectionov. Yuri Ninfectionov. My apologies if I screw up all these names. Excellent work, Mike, and far easier on the eye than Graham bloke. Than the Graham bloke. Laugh, laugh. A few pennies for the swear jar. Well, fucking thank you, Yuri. That's much appreciated. I don't think so. I think Graham's gorgeous, and we all know that. Thanks, Graham, for keeping me in the job. So look, let's go back. There are 75,000 junior doctors in the system, and there are 50,000 consultants. Now, in my experience, one of the things that is slightly frustrating, I think, about the NHS is that one of the reasons that it takes a long time to get an appointment with a consultant is many of them, a large number of them, and actually the numbers don't really exist because it's not something that the NHS measures, but many of them work part-time for the NHS, and they supplement their income by working in the private sector. I noticed this last year when I was trying to research the surgeon that I was initially allocated for my cancer care. And when I did a search for him, I found 5 private hospitals that were able to offer me an appointment the next day with that doctor. And I still had to wait 3 weeks to get my appointment. And it's fairly obvious to me. I mean, I'm sure there might be other factors involved, but including waiting lists, etc. And the scale of the NHS compared to the private sector. But it seems to me that if I could get a private appointment with that doctor the following day, then, why was it taking 3 weeks for me to get an appointment with the same doctor on the NHS? And it turns out that these doctors are augmenting their income because their salaries are... It could be argued if I was a right-wing newspaper that they were being greedy, but the average salary of a consultant is something in the region of £100,000 to £153,000 a year, and that seems like a lot of money. But these people have studied for up to 15 years. Most senior consultants have been in the job for something like 20 years, including their study periods, if not more. I am here. I'm genuinely here as testament to at least one of those doctors, certainly 2 of those doctors, who I am glad work for the NHS, and they have done some amazing work in my particular case, and they do that for very many people. So, here's a good point. Rosie in the chat says, happy birthday to Graham's mum, because I just saw a post on Facebook saying the same thing. Graham claims that she's the best mum in the world, but I think he's only got a sample of one, so, let's just be objective about this. But happy birthday, Graham's mum. My mum's actually the best mum in the world. Well, best mum I've got anyway. Right, let's get back to the junior doctors. So consultants doing a lot of private work to augment their income. It is suspected, and there are no numbers for this, but just looking at the general income that can be earned in the private healthcare sector to augment your NHS salary, that consultants are augmenting their £150,000 salary to the tune of almost double. Quite often they can earn £200,000 to £300,000 a year in the private sector on top of their NHS salary. So their salary becomes something in the region of 300 to 400. Now, junior doctors are not so easily able to do that. There was a change in the law in 2020 that meant that they could do some of their training in the private sector, which gave a bit more bandwidth for training. It is possible for a junior doctor to actually work in the private sector, but they generally have less time because it's the junior doctors that are doing most of the work, covering for the fact that the consultants are out there in the private sector doing their work. Sarah Davis, thank you for the £2 towards a gift for Graham's mum. I'm sure Graham will pick something lovely out for her for that, so thank you, Sarah. So if you're a consultant, if you're at the pinnacle of the career in the NHS, you could be earning £200,000 to £300,000, most of which would be coming from the private sector. Salaries vary within the NHS. There are bonuses paid for good management, for good outcomes, health outcomes, etc. So I think Both of my doctors owe me some commission on that because, I had a part to play in that process. I think maybe 20% of their bonus should come to me in my case. But they, look, there's a lot of money to be earned. And one of the reasons that they can earn a lot of money is not necessarily greed. It's more that they could earn that kind of money in Australia, New Zealand, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in fact. They could be earning that money. So there's an internationally competitive pay range, and the NHS has to try and keep up with that. It's very much like the BBC's problem in television, in that they have to pay high salaries to their talent in order to attract them to work on the channel at all, because they can earn a lot more money on in the private sector on ITV. So junior doctors really are aiming towards, they're working all the hours God sends in many cases to support the system that the consultants head up. And while the consultants are off earning good money in the private sector, and the junior doctors are trying to get to a position where they can become that consultant, replace those consultants, and earn a similar amount of money. That's kind of the way the system works. Now, for the last 14 years, and we can't avoid this sagging off the Tories moment, for the last 14 years, pay has almost frozen in this sector. And that goes for junior doctors, to an extent consultants, and also nurses, obviously, as well. Last year we saw the first industrial action by nurses for many years to try and get some parity on their pay, which has been pretty much stagnant, if not going backwards, since 2010. And in junior doctors' case, since 2008, it's almost gone backwards as well. So, it's not just junior doctors. The junior doctors tend to go on strike more, or the BMA tend to go on strike more. Nurses traditionally have not done that. But last year proved that nurses were willing to stand up and make their demands known. Now, there's a lot of love for the staff in the NHS, certainly for nurses, maybe less so for junior doctors, and maybe almost none for consultants. But, there is a lot of love for these staff, and that's quite right too. And they should not be going backwards in wages, although the entire economy has been going that way since 2008 to some extent. And nurses, although they can work in the private sector, it's a lot harder for them to go and earn the big money in the private sector and maintain an NHS job. So we've got this kind of broken system to an extent that means that in order to keep expensive doctors from working abroad, in the great brain drain, and nurses to a great extent, I've spoken to nurses looking to move to New Zealand or Australia to get almost double their salary. But ultimately, these staff have a love for the NHS like we do. So there is that sort of pull on their heartstrings that keeps them in the job. But you've got to pay them decent money to do that. Some of the nurses in my hospital in particular cannot afford to live in Brighton and work in Brighton. So they're also adding a big commute and the cost of travel to their expenses just in order to do the job. These things need to be fixed. Somehow we need to fix these things. If we want our NHS to continue and expand, we need to find a new way to do this. Now, the problem that the government's got is West Streeting. Oh, no, well, the problem West Streeting on behalf of the government has got is that they are ideologically connected to the trade unions' point of view. Let's hope, and we all know that this isn't necessarily the Labour government that we all voted for, but certainly in its foundation, the Labour Party is on the side of trade unions to a great extent. It's on the side of negotiations between management, government, and the trade union and the workers. And in this case, they've got to be torn by this. It's a crisis for them that they're dealing with the Tory black hole of the last 14 years, the underfunding of the NHS, and the stagnation of wages and investment. And they're trying to redress that in an economic situation where they just cannot, they're fiscally bound. Rachel Reeves is fiscally bound to her rules, which means that she can't just print some more money because that will cause more inflation. She can't borrow more money because borrowing's just got more expensive, and you don't want to be paying wages out of borrowed money in particular. So she needs to find that money from somewhere else if they give this pay rise to this particular part of the public sector. Then does that mean everybody in the public sector, and particularly in the NHS, but beyond that even, is going to expect the same kind of salary increases? And you can see why that's a problem for somebody to work out. Yeah. Paula Thomas says, "No, Mike, you got that right. The government's first problem is West Streeting." I agree. I think if we manage to change the narrative and say that if junior doctors were paid the right amount of money, they'd be able to guard the ladies' toilets from trans people using them, then West Streeting would be on it like Flynn. In fact, we should just frame any story we want about the NHS in a trans story, so that we can get Wes to actually go on TV and do something about it. But look, I understand. I'm a pragmatist here. Reeves has got a problem in how do you fund a pay rise like this, and how will it have an impact that is noteworthy to voters, because just increasing the salary of doctors isn't necessarily going to increase the number of appointments they can do. Paying nurses more money isn't necessarily going to make it easier for people to get a bed in a hospital. The outcome for this pay rise is almost a lost cost. It's something that probably needs to happen. In fact, I think certainly needs to happen. But it's not going to have an impact that means that voters can get behind it. Stopping the strikes, maybe yes. But, there's always going to be the risk that there's another strike heading its way if the deal isn't good enough. So what can we do about that? There's a number of solutions out there, aren't there? The Tories' solution over the last 14 years has been largely to push people more towards private healthcare. I spoke to my mother yesterday, and she's suffering from arthritis in her ankles and a problem with her hip. And her GP has recommended some videos to watch of physiotherapy, which I think happens an awful lot at the moment. What I think she wants and needs is some actual physiotherapy help. And she's decided to go private for that. Now, that's just physiotherapy. That's not cancer care, which would be incredibly expensive. But in her case, she's 84 years old, and, being on a 3-month, 4-month waiting list, not a great prospect for her, basically. So cutting through the queues by going private is one of the options that she's looking at. And that must be happening thousands and thousands of times. And it is, statistically, private healthcare insurance has gone up dramatically since 2008. It now represents something in the region of 11 to 12% of the population are using private healthcare, when it used to be in the region of 2 to 4% back in 2008. Now, that's indicative that there's a problem, and a creeping problem within the NHS. In that people are, because of waiting lists, are having to consider going private. And the Tory government certainly has spent a lot of time almost encouraging people to go private. Now, that gives us a classic two-tier system where the NHS starts to struggle more, where doctors are working more in the private sector because there are more customers in the private sector and they can earn more money there, where nurses are encouraged to work over in the private sector. And in fact, one of the biggest problems, and this is something that I think is in the 10-year plan and is controversial from Mr. Streeting's point of view, is that there is an increasing reliance on the private sector from the NHS to provide those services. Now, obviously, the problem with the NHS paying the private sector to do, in my case, my MRI scans were done by a private company. Is that obviously the private company is going to take a skim of profit from the fees that are paid by the NHS. It's probably less than if a millionaire walked in the door and demanded an MRI and a cup of champagne, but it's still a large amount of money that the NHS is paying, and a percentage of that is not going into the actual service or the staff that are operating the MRI scanner. A percentage of that is going towards shareholders. And retaining profit. So what do we do about this, right? This is a big, complicated issue, and I'm not really going to come up with a solution, obviously, today. But it did strike me that there was something interesting about this business model, that the NHS staff are propped up by private sector income to a great extent, certainly at the top and even down the middle, and that the private sector is taking it's poaching those staff as well, and that there is a brain drain abroad of those staff. Now, without those staff, we have no NHS. We absolutely need to encourage the best doctors and nurses to work for our NHS instead of the Netherlands or Finland or Germany or Australia or New Zealand or America, where they can earn a lot more money. Chris C, thank you for the £5 super chat. Maybe if we pruned all the unnecessary middle management positions and capped management wages, we could pay frontline medical staff a proper wage. I think you might be right, Chris. There's certainly a level of management that doesn't need to be there. But the NHS is a monstrous organisation that does need managing, and I don't want doctors sitting there doing admin. Yesterday's stream, I talked about the problems of software and the problems of procurement of software within the NHS in terms of its communications. And that, a large part of that problem is because doctors are involved in IT procurement. And I don't think they should be. I think they should have a feedback loop into the guy that's doing that, but there should be a manager looking across a whole trust to organise that. So, it's a bit easy to say that there is too much management in the NHS. I'm not entirely sure that's true. I don't know for a fact that that's true. I've got quite a bit of experience of dealing with my local trust in particular, and although I think there were some useless people that I dealt with, and it might be quite nice to get rid of some of them. I don't think necessarily getting rid of their role is important. And I think various governments have tinkered around this because management is a relatively easy place to try and make some savings. But I'm not sure those costs would actually turn into higher salaries for doctors. And I think actually it would take a lot of their time away from them. So questionable Absanity, who's been a member, a superstar member for 23 months. Or is a superstar member because they've been here for 23 months. I'm not sure how that works. Has Aaron Banks got a health insurance company? Of course he has. Of course he has. And, insurance is the bane of many people's lives. It's a gambling business that is given credibility by their huge profits. Yuri, who's been a member for 20 months and he's also a superstar. 20 months on parole. Booge. I don't know what that means, but, is it Wes Streeting should be on parole? Maybe? I don't know. You might need to explain yourself, and I'll try and find the context for that. But no, Chris's point is valid that we should look at the management structures and we should look at the management tasks that we're asking doctors to do, and nurses as well. And we should see how much we can actually push these people much more towards primary healthcare than administration themselves. And that means that we need some managers, probably better managers, and that might be a pay issue as well. Who knows? So look, where my head started to go this morning when I was looking into all of this was, hang on, we're paying the private sector to provide NHS services. That always seems slightly illogical to me because of the profit motive that's involved in that. But then when I did some research into this, I discovered that the private healthcare and private insurance is VAT exempt. And that really struck me as something where we might have some space to do something about this. If we think back to the private school debate, not should private schools exist, but should they pay VAT? The answer is a resounding yes, and that's politically popular. The balance with the government is if, like the Tories did and lied to everybody about, if Rachel Reeves raises national insurance in order to meet these bills from this strike action, then that will be unpopular. That's a direct tax on all of us, and an unfair tax on lower income people. And in the Tories' case, they didn't even use the money to pay for the NHS as they promised us they would. But what if we put VAT, and maybe even a higher rate of VAT, on the private healthcare industry? There's two ways to do this. Either a tax directly on private healthcare companies' profits. They're going to find a way to hide those profits, to base themselves in the Isle of Man or something and provide these services. But it's possible that we could tax them on everything they do, or VAT on health insurance itself. If we're not charging VAT at the moment, then we should be doing that. The private healthcare industry in the UK is currently generating, I think last year, something in the region of 12.5 billion pounds, and is predicted in the next 2 years to raise to 14 to 16 billion pounds. Now, it's obviously predicted to do that because if the NHS gets worse, then people will resort to private healthcare, and that will be encouraged, and their business grows while the NHS shrinks. So it seems to me that we could raise a tax, a VAT, on these healthcare services, and use that money directly, ring fence that money directly to supplement the salaries of the junior doctors, nurses, and consultants in the system. Now that would have an impact, which means that, yeah, there's a risk then that we price people out of private healthcare. Now, the only way that you can make that work is if you balance that by improving the NHS. Now, let's just look at my consultant story. A consultant that is working 3 days a week for the NHS and 3 days a week in the private sector, something in that region. Obviously, if we can get them to work 5 days a week in the NHS or 6 days a week in the NHS, then you get more appointments. Then waiting lists go down. If junior doctors are paid more money and therefore and are also not having to cover for these consultants that are working in the private sector so much, then you get more appointments, more scans, more tests, etc. So, and also we get a chance of recruiting the best doctors from around the world. At the moment, we are not very high up the scale of places that people want to come and work once they've done their medical training. You know, I am constantly coming across doctors who have come from abroad to work for the NHS, and I am very grateful for what they do. But it is becoming increasingly difficult to recruit those people. And in fact, a lot of the doctors that we're training within the NHS, the junior doctors, are then moving out to work abroad for higher salary or into the private sector. That would be affected by this, but it is perfectly possible. Are part of the solution. Now, in our case, are part of the solution. Now, in our case, we have a unique model where the NHS has always been free, and the private healthcare sector has just grown. It's not part of the system as it is in other countries. So, for example, in Spain, I know because my son lives there, you have to compulsorily pay for